It was a quiet Sunday afternoon at Paradise Department Store in downtown Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. The store's reputation for luxury and exclusivity was evident in every detail, from the crystal chandeliers to the meticulously arranged designer displays. Olivia Thompson adjusted her casual white t-shirt and vintage jeans as she pushed through the revolving doors. Her natural curls were pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a well-worn leather tote, a stark contrast to the typical Paradise clientele with their designer bags and Sunday best. But that was exactly the point of her unannounced visit. The soft jazz playing through the store speakers did little to mask the clicking of heels approaching from behind her. Richard Blake, the store manager, had spotted her the moment she entered. His perfectly pressed suit and artificial smile couldn't hide the slight twitch in his eye as he watched her examine a Gucci display. "Can I help you find the outlet mall?" Richard's voice dripped with fake concern. "It's about 20 minutes from here." Olivia turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "Actually, I'm quite comfortable where I am, thank you." Richard's smile tightened. "You do realize that bag you're looking at is more than most people make in a month?" He raised his voice slightly, ensuring nearby customers could hear. "Perhaps I could direct you to our clearance section?" A couple browsing nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Olivia maintained her composure, running her fingers along the buttery leather of a $3,000 handbag. "I'm familiar with the price point of these pieces." "Are you?" Richard stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming. "Because we've had some issues with certain individuals lately. Just doing my duty to protect our high-end merchandise." Olivia moved to another display, aware of Richard shadowing her every step. Other customers began to stare, some whispering behind manicured hands. The beautiful space suddenly felt suffocating. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from that display." Richard's voice had lost all pretense of politeness. "This isn't the kind of establishment where you can just wander around touching things." An elderly woman gasped, clutching her pearls. A young couple quickly walked in the opposite direction. Olivia felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment, but from controlled anger. "Sir, I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Olivia said calmly, though her heart was racing. Richard let out a short, harsh laugh. "I am the supervisor. I'm the store manager, and I have the authority to remove anyone who doesn't meet Paradise's standards." From behind a nearby counter, Amelia Foster watched the scene unfold with growing distress. The young sales associate had seen Richard pull this act before, but never quite this boldly. "Those earrings you're looking at are $5,000, Richard announced loudly as Olivia examined a jewelry case. "Perhaps you misread the zeros?" Olivia straightened her spine. "I can assure you I can read just fine." "Can you?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Because the sign clearly states Paradise Luxury Collection, not Paradise Layaway Collection." He gestured toward the exit. "Allow me to show you to a more suitable store. There's a lovely discount shop just—" "I'd like corporate's number," Olivia interrupted, her voice steady. Richard's smirk grew wider. "Of course." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a business card. "Here's the number for all customer complaints." It was his own office number. The tension reached its peak when Olivia reached for a limited edition designer bag from a display case. Richard's face turned red. "That's it." He pulled out his phone. "Security, we have a situation on the main floor." His eyes never left Olivia. "Someone who doesn't belong here is handling our exclusive merchandise." Amelia couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Mr. Blake, she's just looking." "Miss Foster, return to your counter unless you want to join her." Richard's threat was clear. Two security guards appeared, their footsteps heavy on the marble floor. Olivia stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the designer bag that had triggered Richard's final outburst. "This woman needs to be escorted out," Richard declared, straightening his tie with satisfaction. "She's making our valued customers uncomfortable." The security guards looked uncertain, glancing between Richard's smug expression and Olivia's composed demeanor. The store had gone eerily quiet, save for the continued soft jazz playing overhead, a jarring soundtrack to the tense scene. Olivia slowly reached into her well-worn tote bag. Richard took a step back, his face triumphant, clearly expecting her to make a scene. But Olivia Thompson had been underestimated her entire life. And tomorrow, Richard Blake would learn exactly why that was always a mistake. Security guard James Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting uncertainly on his belt. At 52, he'd worked at Paradise long enough to spot the difference between actual trouble and manufactured drama. This situation felt like the latter. "Sir," James began, addressing Richard, Perhaps you should do your job," Richard snapped, his confidence growing with each passing moment. "Or do I need to remind everyone here who signs their paychecks?" Olivia remained still, her hands still inside her tote bag. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the marble floor. A small crowd of customers had gathered at a safe distance, some pretending to shop while obviously watching the scene unfold. "You know," Richard continued, pacing now like a performer commanding his stage, "we get your type in here more often than you think. Coming in, touching everything, treating Paradise like some sort of museum." He spat the last word. "This is a luxury establishment. The merchandise here costs more than..." "Than what, Mr. Blake?" Olivia's voice cut through his rant like a knife through butter. "More than someone like me could afford." "Please finish your thought." Richard's face flushed deeper. "I'm simply maintaining the standards that Paradise is known for. We can't have just anyone." "Just anyone?" Olivia echoed, her eyebrow raised. Amelia Foster had abandoned all pretense of working, her hands gripping the counter so tight her knuckles had turned white. She'd witnessed Richard's behavior for months, the random security checks on certain customers, the not-so-subtle following, the loud comments about prices. But this time felt different. "Mr. Blake," Amelia stepped out from behind the counter, her voice shaking slightly. "I really think you should." "Miss Foster." Richard whirled on her. "One more word and you'll be looking for a new job. In fact, clear out your locker. You're suspended pending review for insubordination." The security guards exchanged glances. James took a small step back, while his younger partner, Tommy Chin, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Now Richard turned back to Olivia, straightening his designer tie. "As I was saying before being interrupted by soon-to-be former employees, I'm going to need you to leave. Voluntarily or with assistance." He gestured to the security guards. Olivia finally withdrew her hand from her tote, but instead of a wallet or phone, she held a small leather portfolio. "Actually, Mr. Blake, I have a few questions about Paradise's customer service policies." Richard let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, this is rich. Let me guess, you're going to threaten to sue. Call the media? Play the race card?" He looked around at his audience, seeking validation. A few nervous titters emerged from the crowd. "No, Mr. Blake. I'm more interested in your specific implementation of these policies." Olivia's voice remained calm. "For instance, could you explain why you followed me through 3 departments but ignored the teenager in ripped jeans who is actually touching every bag in the Fendi display?" Richard's smirk faltered slightly. That's not..." Or perhaps, Olivia continued, opening her portfolio, "you could explain why you've given me corporate's number twice now. Once verbally, once on this card, and both times it's been your office line." "I'm corporate for this location," Richard snapped, but a bead of sweat had appeared on his forehead. "Interesting." Olivia pulled out her phone. "Would you mind if I call that number right now?" "On speaker." "This is ridiculous." "Security, remove her." But neither guard moved. James had taken another step back, recognition slowly dawning on his face as he looked more closely at Olivia. "Wait," he said softly. "Aren't you?" "Mr. Blake," Olivia cut in smoothly. "One last question. The email that went out to all Paradise management last week, the one about the new regional director conducting surprise store visits this month, did you read it?" The color drained from Richard's face so quickly he had to grab a nearby display for support. Behind him, Amelia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. That email." Richard's voice had lost its commanding tone, replaced by something much smaller. "You can't be." Olivia Thompson smiled, and for the first time that afternoon, it reached her eyes. "Mr. Blake, I believe it's time for a proper introduction." "You can't be." Richard's voice cracked. "This is some kind of joke. A setup." Olivia withdrew a final document from her portfolio, an embossed letter with a Paradise corporate letterhead, featuring her photograph and signature. Olivia Thompson, Regional Director of Paradise Department Stores and majority shareholder. The gathered crowd erupted in hushed whispers. Richard stumbled backward, colliding with a display of designer sunglasses that clattered to the floor. "But it's more than that, isn't it, Mr. Blake?" Olivia's voice carried through the now silent store. "Amelia, would you please bring out the file?" Amelia rushed to her locker, returning with a thick manila envelope. Her hands trembled as she handed it to Olivia. 6 months of documented incidents, Olivia continued, removing photographs and printed emails. Racial profiling, discriminatory hiring practices, suspicious terminations. She laid each piece of evidence on a gleaming display case, all meticulously gathered by Miss Foster here, who's been working directly with our corporate investigation team. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. You were spying on me? No, Mr. Blake. We were protecting our customers, our employees, the very values Paradise claims to represent. Olivia pressed a button on her phone. And we're not the only ones who've been watching. The store's massive display screens flickered to life, showing security footage from the past 6 months. Clip after clip revealed Richard's pattern of discrimination, subtle at first, but growing increasingly bold. You see, Richard, that designer bag you stopped me from touching? It was supposed to be your termination gift. Olivia's smile turned sharp. Corporate tradition for managers leaving the company. Though usually, they leave with their dignity intact. The main doors burst open as Paradise's corporate team entered, led by an imposing figure, Charles Thompson, CEO and Olivia's father. Behind them, news crews began setting up their equipment outside the store's glass facade. "Daddy," Olivia called out, her voice carrying a hint of satisfied amusement. "I found that leak in the Atlanta division you were concerned about." Charles Thompson's deep voice resonated through the store. "Richard Blake, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. After the press conference, of course." Richard's legs gave out, and he sank onto a nearby ottoman. "Press conference? Oh yes," Olivia said, straightening her casual white t-shirt. "Paradise is announcing its new zero-tolerance policy against discrimination. We're also launching a $1 million initiative to promote diversity in retail management." She paused, savoring the moment. "Inspired by your instructive example." The news crews were setting up their cameras now, their presence drawing even more onlookers. Smartphones appeared throughout the store, recording every moment of Richard's downfall. "You can't do this," Richard whispered, but his voice held no conviction. "Actually," Amelia stepped forward, holding up her phone. "It's already trending. Hashtag Paradise Lost Prejudice is #3 on Twitter." Charles Thompson addressed the gathering crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, in 5 minutes, Paradise will announce the youngest store manager in our company's history." He smiled warmly at Amelia. "Someone who exemplifies our true values." Richard watched, broken, as Amelia was handed his former office keys. The designer bag he prevented Olivia from touching was presented to her as a gift, along with a new nameplate, Amelia Foster, store manager. "Mr. Blake," Olivia said softly, "I believe you know the way to the exit. Unless you need directions to the unemployment office? It's about 20 minutes from here." As security finally stepped forward to escort him out, Richard caught a glimpse of his reflection in the store's mirrors, his perfectly pressed suit now wrinkled, his carefully controlled world shattered. Above him, the store's speakers had stopped playing jazz, replaced by a new song that seemed to mock him with its lyrics about karma. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The video of his discrimination was already playing on their news van's monitors. His phone buzzed incessantly with social media notifications, each one another nail in the coffin of his career. Olivia watched him go, then turned to address the assembled press. "At Paradise, we believe luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about excellence. Today marks the beginning of a new era, one where everyone is truly welcome." The crowd erupted in applause. Amelia, clutching her new designer bag and nameplate, wiped tears from her eyes. And somewhere in the back near the exit, a security camera caught Richard Blake's final moment in Paradise, alone, defeated, and finally facing the consequences of his actions. The next morning, as Amelia unlocked the store wearing her new manager's badge, she found a handwritten note from Olivia on her desk. "Welcome to Paradise, where karma has excellent taste."